Hello everyone, my name is Iveta and I'm doing a course in Photography Academy of Ireland. For a moment, I am doing an assessment which includes research of particular practice of the chosen photographer. My chosen photographer is Richard Avedon. For my research, I set up a question which is how did development of the Richard Avedon's relationships behind the camera and his models change contemporary photography? For my findings and conclusions, I will talk more closely in this PowerPoint presentation. First slide is about question why. Why did I choose this question? I have few reasons. First of all, motion is a very important component of our lives. Now everything or everyone is on the move. Secondly, the motion is most powerful tool in photography. Like if you're opening any website, any social media, Facebook, Instagram, or any magazine, you can find the pictures where the people or the photographers try to capture or slow down the motion. For example, people or animal actions, light trailing on a street, or the freezing waterfall. What Richard Avedon did, he is inventor of the fashion motion movement, and for the first time, this powerful tool were used in fashion photo shoots. I add two images on this slide. The first image is figure 2, where you can see Richard Avedon himself, and the figure 1 is one of his works. This slide is about historical cultural context of the question. It was the post-war time, the time of after the Second World War, which we know as postmodernism period. In this period, people were against the values-or order before Second World War. In photography, Richard Avedon were against the Stechens principles, which meant richly decorated sets with dramatic lighting and models were standing still. Richard Avedon's fashion movement changed that, and models were more playful and not so serious. With these changes, fashion photography became as a high culture and mass product, as the main photographer of the fashion magazine Vogue were Richard Avedon. The essence of Richard Avedon's fashion movement was when the models on the photo shoot were wearing fashion trends and was doing an action, for example, smiling, jumping, running, dancing, any another activity, while photographer captured the fashion trends, natural motion, the weight, the shape, the texture. As a visual example, I put the figure 4 in this slide. For my secondary research, I chose 5 different fashion blogs where I got information about Richard Avedon's fashion motion movement, about his style, manner, and the practice. I would love to point out that he created 4 different relationships behind the camera and his models. Each of the following slides will contain one relationship with 2 visual examples, one of the Richard Avedon's, another one of contemporary photographers. The very first slide is about the model's friendly environment. What does it mean? Richard Avedon was not only a good psychologist, he took apart himself in the photo shoots, but he created an environment where the models were trust him not only as photographer but as a friend. The same practice is doing Javier Estrada, and her work you can see on the figure 6. The second relationships behind the camera and the models which Richard Avedon created is the plain or white background. As the visual example of this, there is the figure 7. These relationships helped photographer more concentrate on his fashion photo shoot, on the fashion trend, on the model and her attitude, and the portrait by itself. The same practice in contemporary photography is doing Greg Cadell, and there is visual example of his work, the figure 8. The third relationship behind the camera and the models which Richard Avedon were created is another fashion photo shoots, which means that photographer made a real scene where the models were wearing Chanel or Christian Dior clothing at outdoor conditions, and the figure 9 is a good example of this. In contemporary photography, the Sebastian Kim is doing the same practice, and the figure 10 is good example of his fashion photo shoot in Mexico. The last relationship behind the camera and the models which Richard Avedon created is the photo shoots with the models and animals together. Richard Avedon is known as a photographer who used in his photo shoots an animals such as elephants, snakes, dolphins, dogs, so on. As visual example of this relationship, I put the figure 11 where you can see the model and the dog together. In contemporary photography, there is Alice Hawkins who was using and doing the same practice. The figure 12 is one of her work. The research method provenance of the sort which I used for my secondary research I found very helpful and very useful as I started analyze information which I got from these publications. All publications were published on online fashion culture and the lifestyle blogs. They are new publications 2016 or 2018. The writers in these publications are independent journalists, photographers, or the fashion bloggers. In my opinion, the writers are objective, as in general lines information were the same and the writers were cited Richard Avedon himself or his peers. The image source in these publications were from Richard Avedon's foundation, and I didn't find any bias or no one-side view or the negative language. My primary research, I went to say exhibition of contemporary Muslim fashion in Applied Art Museum of Frankfurt. This is new exhibition which is originally held by Fine Art Museum of San Francisco 2018. This exhibition was firstly exhibited in Europe and are controversial and complex. These two images are my reproductions of the pictures which I saw in this exhibition. The name of them are modest street fashion. In this slide, as a primary research, I add another two images from this exhibition Contemporary Muslim Fashion. The image 15 is the main poster of this exhibition in Europe, and the figure 16 is the image by Langston Hughes, Modest Street Fashion. All these four images shows how influential was Richard Avedon's fashion motion movement and proves that contemporary photographers were using Richard Avedon relationships behind camera and the models for their photo shoots. The last slide of this PowerPoint presentation is about the summary of the project which I took to answer the question, how did development of Richard Avedon's relationship behind the camera and his models change contemporary photography? I think I answered on this question with my primary and secondary research. The project shows and visually proved that contemporary photographers are still nowadays using his style, manner, and photoshoot practice. The relationships which Richard Avedon created as photographer, contemporary photographers are using today. The evidence of that is conclusive. Richard Avedon is most influential photographer of the 20th century. For my research, I took several steps, which you can see on my last slide.